Hi, I'm Rachel Silvey. I'm the director of the Asian Institute here at the Munk School of Global Affairs, and I'm also a professor in the Geography and Planning Department at the University of Toronto.
And I'm Ed Schatz. I direct the Center for European and Eurasian Studies here at the Munk School, and I'm also a professor of political science at the University of Toronto. And we're here to talk about our book, which is out with Oxford University Press. It's called Seeing China's Belt and Road. And this is a book that deals with one of the potentially momentous changes in the architecture of the global political economy that started in 2013 with with the rollout of China's Belt and Road project, what would come to be known as the Belt and Road project, 2013. And since that time, more than $1 trillion have been allocated to infrastructure development and financing around the globe, principally in neighborhoods that are adjacent to China, but not only, in places as far as Europe, Latin America, Africa, and so on have all been affected by this. And so that's what our book is designed to take stock of.
And knowing that there was this massive rollout of this enormous project, the size of which is really incomparable to anything that's been done before, it makes the Marshall Plan look quite small. In fact, we wanted to understand it better. We wanted to understand it also in relation to the large literature that was coming out on it that we didn't believe was doing justice to the complexities of the project
Yeah.
and how it was rolling out in different places.
No, absolutely, and it's that variety that we wanted to take stock of in this book. And so the book has 9 substantive chapters by a variety of different scholars working across a variety of different disciplines, and it takes stock of all of a great range of what is happening in countries affected by China's Belt and Road, from Switzerland to Southeast Asia to Central Asia to the Horn of Africa. There's a lot of food for thought in this volume.
And I think what's really exciting about it is it does that from all of these places with a wide range of topics that will both teach people who don't know a lot about the Belt and Road, provide them an introduction, and also give a unique way of thinking about the Belt and Road for people who may already know quite a bit about it.
The enormity of it doesn't really predetermine what ends up happening, right? And that's what the chapter authors are really about showing, is that in concrete places with concrete human beings, under concrete circumstances, the rollout of the BRI looks different than in other places, right? And so I think that's exciting.
And that each of these scholars is able to actually tell you why and how in these particular places is a result of their expert knowledge in these particular spots. So we were delighted to have these wonderful chapter authors do this work, and to see it combined in this collection is really exciting.
It's exciting, and it was a great honor to work with these people. And I think that anyone who picks up this book is going to learn a lot, even a lot about context that they might know reasonably well already.
So my chapter for this volume on the BRI and looking at the BRI from the context of security focuses largely on China's growing military and security ties with Central Asia. Our chapter introduces a number of new data sets, looking at arms transfers and sales to the region, and also military exercises and training. I think one of the great contributions of our chapter is looking at the ways in which China's domestic politics often drive its engagement with other parts of the world. So in particular, we find that a lot of the military drills, unlike other actors that are historically important in the region, such as Russia, which have conventional military-to-military training exercises, China uses a lot of security services in its training, which kind of emphasizes its real focus on Uyghurs or counter extremist rhetoric, a lot of their engagement for the region. So they have a very securitized discourse when it comes to their engagement with Central Asia, largely about suppressing any Uyghur political activities or the return of alleged Uyghur fighters who are engaged in conflicts in the Middle East who may be returning and using Central Asia as a base for which to infiltrate Chinese borders. So that's kind of China's security understanding of Central Asia. And a lot of its drills are reminiscent of that. It uses security services who are working with National Guard units in each of the republics doing counterterrorism drills.
We particularly look at the way in which China sees the Belt and Road as through a security lens. The way in which China's growing presence in the neighboring region of Central Asia has generated certain backlash, perceived threats from Uyghur separatists and terrorists, for example, attacks that have taken place against Chinese investments, particularly at moments of regime destabilization, such as in Kyrgyzstan when there was a revolution in 2020, and many individuals targeted Chinese investments during that time of when there was a power vacuum. And so the way in which China is increasingly getting entangled in this local politics and increasingly seeing the Belt and Road through a security lens. We view the Belt and Road as part of a project for China to build hierarchical relationships, relations of dependence with its neighboring states, and we show that through data on arms transfers, data on military exercises and training, in which the Central Asian security apparatuses are increasingly becoming dependent on Chinese assistance.
Related to my chapter in the book, I used a set of ideas that and data that I gathered from secondary sources and from interviews relating to the amount of debt certain countries in the global south had taken on from China in order to build up their infrastructure, in order to further their economic progress after the coronavirus hit.
Between 2013 and 2019, I can't remember how many times I went to China, but in some cases it was sometimes even more than twice a year. So, and when I went to China, I would often meet with Chinese scholars and political economy and ask them about the BRI and China's going out process. And I had been involved in a number of projects with China's going out, or even earlier. And so this had been an area of interest of mine, I guess from the beginning of the going out process already in the 20-aughts. But the interesting thing to me was that when the BRI was announced, then it becomes has a kind of framework notion of it, which was new and which I pursued. And of course, since I had many contacts in China, I would go and ask people about this, and I would get certain details, like the details that the BRI was being managed through the same office as the Develop the West thing, or what they call in China sometimes is one institution, two signboards. And that was done for quite a while. And it also became clear to me that the steering organization was the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, and that becomes a focus, especially of Carl Jan's work. And he did interviews with the National Development and Reform Commission, as well as with the railway sector. So he had the insight. He had been working on the railway sector inside China before that. And his PhD thesis was on the railway sector. So he had deep information on the railway sector. I had this more of a kind of overall information of the Chinese state. So we could compare notes on okay, who does what, where, when, and how, and he could bring it down to the project level, where I would focused more on the conceptual level.
So my chapter in this book started from an interest in thinking about the tensions between ambiguity of the Belt and Road Initiative and also kind of the grand spectacle of the initiative. It was making headlines, kind of all over the world. You had 100 and something countries signing on as I started to study it, but it also seemed like this really elusive, ambiguous initiative. So my fieldwork follows kind of in the trend of several other scholars who started to look at the Belt and Road from the ground. And I ended up doing my dissertation fieldwork in Laos for about 18 months and working in local communities and villages around construction sites within special economic zones. And my fieldwork was very kind of on the ground within one economic corridor. So this chapter highlights that corridor research. I kind of call it a follow the corridor approach, and tried to look at several Belt and Road Initiative projects within that, taking into account not only kind of the local perspectives, but how, again, labor operates, local land politics, questions about how projects are built beyond just their material construction, but how we think about them, how we see them, how certain people are seen in light of them. So my chapter tries to merge a lot of those insights into one paper to think about visibility around the Belt and Road Initiative and resolve that tension between its ambiguity and spectacle.
So the chapter in my book was part of this bigger project on Chinese digital infrastructures in Switzerland. And I have a background in anthropology and also in China studies. So as an anthropologist, I obviously wanted to do field work, and I tried to do this in various ways, although actually this field has been very difficult to access. On the one hand, because I had to do studying up, meaning that I had to approach managers, company managers, people of a higher status than I am usually, and also people from companies who have legal departments who are very well aware of their rights and also shaping what people should talk about them that have an interest in presenting themselves in a certain way. So what I did manage to do was, on the one hand, to conduct formal interviews with a range of different company managers, on the one hand, Chinese companies in the fiber optic sector, in the digital sector in Switzerland, but also with their Swiss partner companies. And in addition to this, I also conducted some informal interviews. I went to a lot of industry events where I could get to know more about the activities of these companies and what they were actually doing. And also because it's, obviously a very technical field, and I didn't have prior knowledge in this fiber optic field. So I also made sure to get some technical training on fiber optics, and joining some cable laying company in Switzerland, and also people who actually install all of these devices. So I did a bit of training with them and combined that also with participant observation. And then, because of course there are still some parts that you cannot access in this field, so I also relied a lot on documentary research to complement my ethnographic data.
So my chapter dives into an often overlooked but crucial aspect of China's Belt and Road Initiative, its digital arm, the Digital Silk Road. Unlike most research that examines the Digital Silk Road through the lens of elite perceptions such as company records or state policies, my study shifts the focus to those at the receiving end of this initiative. It asks, how do citizens view and react to the growing presence of Chinese-made surveillance cameras in Central Asia? Central Asia is a region marked by a complex mix of authoritarian governance, rapid digital expansion, and growing geopolitical importance. By examining public attitudes towards surveillance cameras produced by Chinese companies like Huawei, Dahua Technology, and Hikvision, I shed light on how these technologies, embedded within the Digital Silk Road, reshape Central Asians' perceptions of safety and privacy. To explore this question, I use a unique bottom-up approach that combines survey data from the World Value Survey Wave 7 with visual documentation of Chinese surveillance cameras in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. My findings reveal that most Central Asians approve of the government's use of Chinese surveillance cameras. So, contrary to what we might expect, rather than viewing the intensified surveillance as an intrusion into their privacy, they generally see the state's deployment of surveillance cameras as a public good that enhances security. Women in particular view these cameras as safeguards against gender-based violence in public spaces. My results challenge, therefore, the conventional views that people in authoritarian societies simply lack an understanding of privacy rights. Instead, the result shows that many Central Asians consciously support CCTV surveillance enabled by China's digital Silk Road due to the historical legacies and present political realities. My study, therefore, not only offers a groundbreaking perspective that considers people's lived experiences and perceptions of China's BRI, it also offers fresh insights into the implications of China's growing digital footprint and what this means for citizens' privacy in the 21st century.
This chapter explores the lived experiences of labor migration among Chinese expatriate managers and migrant workers in Africa. And I chose the words expatriates to kind of encompass a very broad spectrum of Chinese individuals working in Africa, ranging from managers to specialists to professionals and manual workers. And a common feature of this group is their transnational mobility is often facilitated by globalized Chinese companies. So their kind of transnational movement is typically short-term, work-based, and also tied to their employment relations with Chinese companies. And for fieldwork, I did my fieldwork in Ethiopia, where I studied Chinese individuals from 3 different sectors: construction, which, as we can imagine, are labor intensive and mostly employed less skilled workforce. Telecommunication is the second sector, which represents more kind of knowledge and technology intensive sector and employs relatively well-educated groups of Chinese. Manufacturing is the third sector, which is characterized by kind of large numbers of small private investors and kind of family owned firms. So I drawn upon over 60 interviews during my field work and from these 3 sectors to understand the process of expatriation. I looked at their pre-departure, workers' experience during their tenure in Ethiopia, and at the stage when they thinking about repatriation, right, back to China. And I'm looking at different questions at the 3 different stages. So for pre-departure, I look at what factors that drive their decision to take up this overseas position and to what extent they can negotiate their contract details. And during their tenure in Ethiopia, I explore how their everyday lives are regulated and managed, and what are the challenges they experienced while working in a foreign country. So during the post-expatriation stage, I look at what options they have back home, and especially how they decide and how they experience the kind of a contract renewal or repatriation.
What we're seeing with China's engagement around the world is that it's becoming much more of a political actor. A lot of countries that have fragmented political systems or a lot of internal disagreement, you're seeing a lot of discourse now about China's growing role that's being used to mobilize people for political purposes. For example, if a regime happens to be cooperating with China on large-scale infrastructure projects, local opposition movements will accuse the regime of corruption and mobilize segments of the population. against the government using China as a lens. We're seeing China emerging across a lot of issues, from climate to human rights to security matters. So there's definitely a very complex space unfolding where China now, as an established political actor, much like the United States, Russia, and other actors prominent around the world, it's now facing a lot of that political backlash, complex relations where actors that are pro-China, anti-China are all competing for political space in the national discourses. So I think it's a very exciting time to be studying China's engagement.
There are any interesting research avenues to pursue related to China's global role. Of course, it's become more difficult for students, particularly from countries such as the United States, where we're based, to spend considerable amounts of time in China. There are still some opportunities. The Schwarzman Fellowship that Bradley participated in is one of them, to go and spend time and study and live in China. But at the same time, there are plenty of opportunities also to study China outside of China and to learn the language and to do things such as we did, collecting unique data sets. So in a different article that was published in China, which was subbed in the Journal of Contemporary China earlier this year, we collected, for example, a data set of press releases, Chinese language press releases on meetings between Central Asian and Chinese officials going back to 1991 when the region became independent from the Soviet Union, to try and links to this kind of message of seeing, talk about how China's thinking about the region, how it's seen the region has evolved over time. So there's plenty of data that's out there, even if you're unable to travel or spend time in China, that can be used to gain unique insights.
I would advise them to pick an area of the world that they feel that China is active in and that may be understudied, maybe less known, especially to readers and audiences in the West, and to try and go to those places to try to do field work and speak to the people on the ground, because there's no substitute for on-the-ground local knowledge in terms of understanding the relationship that China has with that specific country, with that specific place.
I mean, what comes out of our work is, if you want to know what China does elsewhere, first find out what China does at home. If you understand how China does things, then you'll understand much better what China is doing abroad.
One, I think it's critical to have a handle on what we mean when we say China, and to constantly be breaking apart this singular idea of China as operating with one sort of logic or force behind it. So pushing students to know their Chinese history, know the kind of pathways of Chinese external development, and to, again, break apart this monolith of China. I'd also really push those students to have long-term grounded fieldwork objectives wherever they would like to research global China. Having a grasp on one or more languages is critical to this research. Understanding the contextual dynamics, not just seeing global China as a moment in history, but understanding it in a longer trajectory of history of a place. For example, thinking about in my own work, how histories of infrastructure development from colonialism through the Cold War to the present are connected in really interesting ways. So I would push students to do a lot of historical reading, language study, and spend time on the ground.
I think my most important suggestion would be to really go on the ground and really talk to actors, to look at the actors and really to talk to the people, and not just talk, but also observe. So, because obviously many times there can be differences in what people say, what they publicly claim, and what they actually do. So I think as an anthropologist, we are very well aware of these differences. So I would really suggest anyone to go beyond just mere policy papers and to really look on the ground what is happening, and to observe and to immerse yourself in it.
If you're interested in studying China, speed up your Mandarin. Other aspect, try to be critical. Try to be critical. Don't just believe every narrative you hear on in policy briefs, and in particular American policy briefs. Just try to make up your own mind and really study the region and go there if you have the chance, because it's just an interesting experience as well. because I actually was the first time in China mainland only a year ago, and I was shocked by the extent to what everything was digitalized in Beijing and Shanghai. And it somehow also kind of, I mean, of course, there were surveillance aspects, which I noticed because I'm sensibilized towards those. But at the same time, there are also other aspects. And just when we talk about technological progress, which are just unseen and in any kind of aspect.
One of the things I think this is definitely a great time to study China's global influence. Given all the challenges of conducting fieldwork and doing research, accessing materials, and even interview participants within China. And it's also important to know the challenges, the logistic challenges, even the literature challenges, right? You are not engaging with China only, you are engaging with the host country, the host community that you are working with. So kind of striking a balance between understanding what's happening in China that influences what Chinese bring overseas, but also understanding the deeply place-based histories, political economies, the social, cultural configurations in the host community, host environment that will influence how people receive and interact, negotiate with Chinese actors. So I think this balance will be something I highly recommend younger generation of scholars will take into account in their research.